What happens when Hollywood royalty meets late-night television's sharpest wit, and the cameras capture every explosive second? You won't believe what unfolds when a routine celebrity interview transforms into the most shocking confrontation in late-night history. Tonight we're diving deep into the dramatic showdown that left audiences speechless and social media in absolute chaos. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when Stephen Colbert faces off against Meghan Markle in what started as a simple promotional appearance but quickly spiraled into television gold. The Ed Sullivan Theater buzzed with its usual pre-show energy as The Late Show with Stephen Colbert prepared for what seemed like another standard celebrity interview. The audience, packed with eager fans, had no idea they were about to witness television history in the making. As the familiar opening theme played and Stephen Colbert took his place behind the iconic desk, the atmosphere felt electric with anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle," Colbert announced with his trademark enthusiasm. But even the seasoned host couldn't have predicted the storm that was about to unfold. Meghan emerged from behind the curtain, waving gracefully to the applauding audience, her smile picture-perfect as she made her way across the stage. Dressed in an elegant navy blazer that commanded attention, she carried herself with the poise expected of someone who had navigated both Hollywood and British royalty. The audience's cheers were warm and welcoming, creating what appeared to be the perfect setup for another successful late-show interview. As she settled into the guest chair, Colbert flashed his welcoming smile, the same one that had charmed countless A-listers over the years. "Meghan, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's great to have you back in New York." "Thank you for having me, Stephen. It's wonderful to be here," Meghan replied, her voice carrying that familiar blend of California charm and refined elegance that had captivated audiences worldwide. The opening pleasantries flowed smoothly, with Colbert asking about her recent projects and philanthropic endeavors. Meghan spoke passionately about her latest initiatives, her words carefully chosen and delivered with the polish of someone accustomed to high-stakes interviews. The audience responded positively, laughing at the right moments and applauding her humanitarian efforts. But beneath the surface pleasantries, there was an undercurrent of tension that seasoned television watchers might have detected. Colbert, known for his incisive interviewing style, had clearly done his homework, and his questions, while respectful, carried an edge that suggested he wasn't planning to stick to the usual softball celebrity interview format. "So let's talk about your recent statements regarding privacy and media intrusion," Colbert said, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly. "You've been quite vocal about wanting privacy for your family. Yet you've also signed several high-profile media deals and continue to make public appearances. How do you reconcile those two positions?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and perceptive viewers could see a flash of something cross Meghan's face. Surprise, perhaps, or annoyance, that the interview was taking a more challenging turn than expected. Her smile remained in place, but it seemed to tighten slightly around the edges. "Well, Stephen, I think there's a difference between choosing when and how to share your story versus having your privacy invaded without consent," she replied, her voice maintaining its measured tone, though careful listeners might have detected a slight defensive edge creeping in. Colbert nodded thoughtfully, but his follow-up question revealed he wasn't backing down from this line of inquiry. "That's an interesting distinction, but some critics have suggested that you can't have it both ways, seeking privacy while simultaneously building a media empire. What's your response to those who say you're being somewhat contradictory?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop a degree. Meghan's posture straightened almost imperceptibly, and her carefully maintained composure showed the first hairline cracks. The audience, still unaware of the brewing storm, remained quiet, sensing that something more significant than typical celebrity banter was unfolding before their eyes. What happened next would transform a routine late-night interview into the most talked-about television moment of the year. setting the stage for a confrontation that would leave viewers stunned and forever change how both participants would be perceived by the public. Meghan's carefully crafted response revealed the first crack in her composed facade. "Stephen, I think you're mischaracterizing my position," she said, her voice carrying a sharp edge that hadn't been there moments before. "There's a fundamental difference between telling your own story on your own terms and having tabloids fabricate stories about your private life." Colbert leaned forward slightly, sensing he had touched a nerve. His journalistic instincts, honed through years of political interviews, told him to press further. "But isn't that exactly what critics are questioning? You've done multiple interviews, a Netflix series, a podcast, written a book, all sharing intimate details about your life. How is that different from what the tabloids do?" The audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the light-hearted celebrity chat they had expected. The energy in the studio was changing, becoming charged with an uncomfortable tension that made everyone present acutely aware they were witnessing something unprecedented. Meghan's smile disappeared entirely now, replaced by a look of barely contained frustration. "The difference, Stephen, is truth versus lies. When I speak, I'm telling my truth. When tabloids write about me, they're often printing complete fabrications, designed to destroy my reputation and harm my family." "Your truth," Colbert repeated, emphasizing the possessive pronoun with the precision of a seasoned interviewer who had just found his opening. "That's an interesting phrase. Some would argue that truth isn't subjective, that there are facts, and then there are interpretations of those facts. Which category would you say your public statements fall into?" The question hung in the air like a challenge thrown down between two skilled opponents. Meghan's eyes flashed with something that viewers would later describe as a mixture of anger and disbelief. She had clearly expected the usual fawning celebrity interview treatment, not this surgical dissection of her public persona. "I'm not sure I appreciate the implication of that question," Meghan replied, her voice now noticeably cooler. "Are you suggesting that I've been dishonest in my public statements?" Colbert maintained his professional demeanor, but there was steel in his voice when he responded. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking direct questions about apparent contradictions between your stated desire for privacy and your very public media presence. Isn't that exactly what journalism is supposed to do?" The word journalism seemed to strike Meghan like a physical blow. Her composure, which had been gradually eroding throughout the exchange, took another significant hit. "This isn't journalism, Stephen. This feels more like an ambush. I came here expecting a respectful conversation about my charitable work and upcoming projects, not to be interrogated like I'm on trial." The audience collectively held its breath. They could sense that something was building, that this exchange was rapidly approaching a point of no return. Colbert's production team, watching from the wings, exchanged worried glances. This was uncharted territory. "An ambush?" Colbert's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "Meghan, these are the same questions that any public figure should expect when they make themselves available for interviews. Accountability isn't an ambush. It's part of public discourse." Meghan's hands, which had been resting gracefully in her lap throughout the interview, now gripped the arms of her chair. Her knuckles were visibly white, and her breathing had become slightly more rapid. The camera operators, sensing the dramatic tension, began tightening their shots to capture every micro-expression. "Accountability?" Meghan's voice rose slightly, causing several audience members to lean forward in their seats. "To whom am I accountable? To you? To the media that has spent years trying to tear me down? I don't owe anyone explanations for how I choose to live my life or protect my family." The defiance in her voice was unmistakable now, and Colbert recognized that the interview had crossed into territory that would define both of their reputations. The seasoned host made a choice that would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed. "Actually, Meghan, I think you do owe explanations," Colbert said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that silenced the murmurs rippling through the audience. When you use your platform to make serious allegations about racism, about being silenced, about your mental health struggles, allegations that have damaged institutions and individuals, then yes, you become accountable to the public discourse. You've chosen to enter. The words hit like a thunderbolt. Meghan's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, and something that looked dangerously close to rage. The studio audience, completely unprepared for this level of confrontation, sat in stunned silence. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut away. "How dare you?" Meghan said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting would have. "How dare you minimize my experiences and reduce them to allegations? I lived through what I described. I suffered through it. And now you're sitting here suggesting I made it up for attention?" Colbert didn't back down. If anything, he leaned forward, his journalist instincts fully engaged. "I'm not minimizing anything. I'm asking for the same thing any responsible journalist would ask for: specificity, accountability, and acknowledgement that your words have consequences for real people." Real people? Meghan's composure finally shattered completely. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that echoed through the now silent studio. "What about me? Am I not a real person? What about my children? Are they not real people who have to live with the hatred and vitriol that people like you perpetuate?" The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front rows looked genuinely frightened by the intensity of the moment. Colbert's production team was frantically signaling from the wings, but the host remained seated, his hands folded calmly on his desk. "Meghan, please sit down. Let's have a conversation about this," Colbert said, his voice steady but firm. "I'm not perpetuating anything. I'm asking legitimate questions that millions of people have about the claims you've made publicly." "Legitimate questions?" Meghan's voice rose to a level that made several audience members visibly uncomfortable. "You want to talk about legitimate? Let's talk about the legitimate trauma of being hounded by photographers. Let's talk about the legitimate fear of having your family's safety threatened. Let's talk about the legitimate pain of being abandoned by an institution that promised to protect you." She was pacing now, her hands gesturing wildly, her carefully constructed public persona completely abandoned. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming the most explosive late-night television moment in recent memory. "And yet," Colbert interjected, his voice cutting through her emotional display, "you continue to court that same media attention. You continue to make yourself available for interviews, documentaries, and public appearances. You can't simultaneously claim to be a victim of media attention while actively seeking it out." The logic of his statement seemed to infuriate Meghan even more. She whirled around to face him directly, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made the studio feel electric with tension. "You don't get to dictate how I heal from my trauma," she shot back, her finger pointing directly at Colbert. "You don't get to decide how I reclaim my narrative. And you certainly don't get to sit there in your comfortable chair, in your safe little studio, and judge how I've chosen to survive what you could never understand." The personal nature of the attack crossed a line that everyone in the studio could feel. Colbert's demeanor shifted subtly, his professional mask slipping just enough to reveal a flash of genuine anger. "Meghan, you're absolutely right that I don't understand your experience," he said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "But I do understand responsibility. And when you make public accusations that affect real institutions and real people's lives, you become subject to public scrutiny. That's not judgment. That's accountability." The word accountability seemed to be the final straw. Meghan's face flushed with anger, and she took a step closer to Colbert's desk, her voice rising to a level that filled the entire studio. "Accountability? You want to talk about accountability?" Where's the accountability for the institution that drove me to the point of considering suicide? Where's the accountability for the media that publishes lies about me daily? Where's your accountability for ambushing me on live television? The studio had become a pressure cooker, and everyone present could sense that something was about to explode in a way that would make television history. Colbert stood up from behind his desk, matching Meghan's energy with a calm authority that only seemed to fuel her rage further. "Meghan, I think you need to take a step back and remember where you are. This is a professional environment, and you're a guest on my show." "Your show?" Meghan's voice cracked with incredulous laughter that held no humor whatsoever. "This isn't a show, Stephen. This is a hit piece. This is exactly the kind of calculated destruction that I've been warning people about. You invited me here under false pretenses to humiliate me on national television." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Members of the studio audience began looking around nervously, some pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming an unprecedented moment in television history. The energy in the room had shifted from uncomfortable to genuinely volatile. "Nobody invited you here under false pretenses," Colbert replied, his voice remaining steady despite the chaos erupting around him. "You came here to promote your projects, and I asked you questions that any journalist worth their salt would ask. If you can't handle basic scrutiny, perhaps you shouldn't be doing interviews." The words struck Meghan like a physical blow. Her eyes widened with a mixture of shock and fury that transformed her face into something the audience barely recognized. The polished, composed duchess they had welcomed onto the stage had been completely replaced by someone raw, angry, and utterly unfiltered. "Can't handle scrutiny?" she repeated, her voice rising to a near shout. "I've handled more scrutiny than you could imagine. I've been torn apart by the press, abandoned by my family, and subjected to racist attacks that would have broken most people. Don't you dare suggest I can't handle scrutiny." "Then why are you falling apart right now?" Colbert shot back, his own composure finally showing cracks. "Why are you shouting and pacing and making this personal, instead of simply answering straightforward questions about your public statements?" The directness of his challenge seemed to push Meghan over an invisible edge. She stopped pacing abruptly and turned to face him with an intensity that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Because I'm tired!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the studio with such force that the sound technicians visibly winced. "I'm tired of people like you thinking you have the right to dissect my life, my pain, my trauma for entertainment. I'm tired of being treated like a circus act instead of a human being." The raw emotion in her voice was undeniable, but it was coupled with a level of anger that felt dangerous. Colbert's security team began moving closer to the stage area, their training kicking in as they assessed whether intervention might be necessary. "Meghan, nobody is treating you like a circus act," Colbert said, his voice softer now but still firm. "But when you make yourself a public figure, when you give interviews making serious allegations, you have to expect that people will ask follow-up questions. That's how this works." "How this works?" Meghan's laughter was bitter and sharp. "How this works is that I get ambushed by men who think they know better than I do about my own experiences. How this works is that I get blamed for seeking attention when I try to defend myself, and blamed for being secretive when I stay quiet." She was gesturing wildly again, her movements becoming more erratic as her emotional state deteriorated further. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming one of the most dramatic meltdowns in television history. "You want to know the truth, Stephen?" she continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than her shouting had. "The truth is that people like you are exactly why I left. People who smile to your face while they sharpen their knives behind your back. People who pretend to be allies while they set you up for destruction." Colbert's face hardened at the personal attack. "I'm not setting anyone up for anything. I'm doing my job as a journalist, which is to ask questions when public figures make Public statements. If you can't distinguish between accountability and persecution, that's your problem, not mine. The words hit their target with devastating precision. Meghan's face went through a series of expressions: hurt, rage, and finally, something that looked like determination. She straightened up, her whole body language shifting as she seemed to make a decision that would shock everyone present. "You know what, Stephen?" she said, her voice suddenly calm in a way that was far more unsettling than her previous shouting had been. "You're absolutely right. This is your show, and these are your rules, but I don't have to play by them." The studio fell into an eerie silence as everyone sensed that something monumental was about to happen. Meghan's sudden shift from explosive anger to cold determination sent chills through the audience, and even Colbert seemed to sense that the situation was about to take a turn that no one had anticipated. Without warning, Meghan reached for the small microphone clipped to her blazer and yanked it off, the sound creating a sharp feedback screech that made everyone in the studio wince. She held it up like a weapon, her eyes locked on Colbert with an intensity that was genuinely frightening. "You want accountability, Stephen? Here's some accountability for you," she said, her voice carrying a cold fury that was far more unsettling than her previous shouting. "This interview ends now. I refuse to be part of your character assassination disguised as journalism." She threw the microphone down onto Colbert's desk with such force that it bounced and clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the stunned studio like a gunshot. Several audience members gasped audibly, and one woman in the front row actually stood up as if preparing to leave. "Meghan, you can't just—" Colbert began, but she cut him off with a gesture so sharp and dismissive that it silenced him mid-sentence. "I can do whatever I want," she snapped, her voice carrying across the studio without amplification. "Unlike you, I don't have to hide behind scripted questions and fake sincerity. I can tell the truth about what just happened here." She turned toward the audience, her movements precise and calculated, like a prosecutor addressing a jury. "You all just witnessed exactly what I've been talking about," she announced, her voice projecting clearly to every corner of the theater. "This is how the media operates. They invite you in with smiles and promises of fair treatment. Then they ambush you with gotcha questions designed to make you look unstable." The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply remain silent. This was uncharted territory for everyone present, and the discomfort in the room was palpable. Some people were recording with their phones, recognizing that they were witnessing something that would dominate social media within hours. Colbert, regaining his composure, stepped around his desk. "Meghan, asking follow-up questions about public statements isn't an ambush. It's journalism. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, perhaps you shouldn't make public statements that require clarification." His words were like gasoline on a fire. Meghan whirled around to face him, her eyes blazing with renewed fury. "Clarification? You mean like clarifying why I had suicidal thoughts? Like clarifying exactly which member of the royal family made racist comments about my son? Like clarifying every private moment of pain for your entertainment? If you didn't want to discuss those topics, you shouldn't have brought them up in multiple public forums," Colbert replied, his voice steady but firm. "You can't weaponize your trauma and then claim immunity from questions about it." The word weaponize seemed to be the final trigger. Meghan's face contorted with rage, and she took several steps toward the edge of the stage, clearly preparing to leave. But instead of simply walking away, she turned back for one final devastating salvo. "This is exactly why Harry and I left," she declared, her voice carrying a finality that made everyone present understand that this confrontation was reaching its conclusion. This is exactly the kind of institutional cruelty and calculated destruction that we refuse to subject our children to. And Stephen, you've just proved every single point I've ever made about how the media operates." She began walking towards the stage exit, but Colbert couldn't let her have the last word. The media didn't make you lose control tonight, Meghan. Your inability to handle legitimate questions did that all by yourself. The words stopped her in her tracks. She turned back one final time, her face a mask of cold fury that would be screenshotted and memed within hours of the show's airing. "Goodbye, Stephen," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Enjoy explaining to your viewers why you chose to bully a woman who came here in good faith. I'm sure it will make for great ratings." With that, she walked off the stage, her heels clicking against the floor in the dead silence that had fallen over the studio. The audience sat in shocked silence, unsure how to react to what they had just witnessed. Even Colbert seemed momentarily speechless, standing alone on his stage as his most explosive interview ever came to its dramatic conclusion. The cameras continued rolling as security personnel followed Meghan's exit, and Colbert slowly returned to his desk, the weight of what had just transpired settling over the studio like a heavy blanket. Within hours, clips of the confrontation would be trending across every social media platform, sparking fierce debates about accountability, media, responsibility, and the limits of public scrutiny. The incident would indeed mark a turning point in public perception, with many viewers feeling that they had witnessed not journalism in action, but a person's complete inability to handle the basic expectations that come with choosing to live life in the public eye. The confrontation had revealed something raw and unfiltered that would reshape how both participants would be viewed by the public for years to come.